So, anyways, we are in a series that's called Unlikely Heroes, where we are looking at the Old Testament and specifically finding characters that their stories, when we zoom in on them, we realize how unlikely it was that God would actually use these people. And the reason why we're doing a series like this is that sometimes it's helpful for us in our own lives as we're going through our Monday to Sunday, where we feel unlikely. We feel like maybe we aren't the kind of people that God could use, or that we have situations or things that exist within our story that might block the ability for God's kingdom to be able to move forward. That we would actually read these stories, some stories maybe that we've heard our entire lives if we grew up within church, or maybe we've seen a version of them on Broadway or told in our culture through some type of movie, but we would actually sit in them long enough to be able to say, wait, what did God do, and what might God be open to doing within my own life? And so that's the series. That's why we're looking at Old Testament heroes and Old Testament people who came alongside of God. Today, we're going to talk about a teenager, a 17-year-old, who found himself with some big dreams that actually got him into a whole lot of trouble. The person I'm talking about is the person of Joseph. He's a biblical character who is actually the great-grandson or grandson of Abraham. And he was someone who, the Bible tells us in the book of Genesis, that at the age of 17, his dad gave him a really ornate, beautiful coat. And that in doing so, because of his love for his son, his kind of favoritism for his son, he set that boy up to have a lot of dissonance and tension within the greater family. And so I'm going to read a couple of scripture passages for you just to give you the setting. And then because we don't have the time to look at all of Joseph's life, this is just one message, but his story actually covers numerous chapters from, I think, Genesis 37 all the way to 50. And so we don't have time to read all of that today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you kind of the opening setting. And then from there, I'm going to take you through a little bit of the roller coaster that was Joseph's life and pull out of that some of the things that I believe his life has to teach us. So if you would, start with me in Genesis chapter 37. And this is going to be verses 3 to 4. If you have a Bible with you, you can pull it open there. Some of these words will be on the screen. I am going to jump around a little bit, so follow along with me as you can, okay? So Genesis chapter 37, verses 3 to 4, it says this: Now Israel, that was the name that Jacob was given. So this is where we get the Israelites from. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Now, I have 3 boys in my house, and there is constant competition about absolutely nothing. Like, it doesn't matter. These 3 little boys, it doesn't matter what it is, but they are competing. Who got more milk in their cup, right? Who is the one who gets to sit closer to mommy, or who gets to sit closer to mommy? They don't care as much about me. But that's where the fight's, but it's about everything. Now, this was a family of 13 boys, 12 at this point in time, 12 boys from different parents coming together, trying to figure it out, and it's not going so well. We jump forward just a couple verses to Genesis chapter 37, verse 5 through 8. It says this: Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Now, not the wisest insight for this 17-year-old boy to share with his brothers, some of them considerably older than him, right? And yet he tells this dream, they don't like him, and then he has another dream. And this time it's about the sun, moon, and stars all bowing down to him. He tells this one to his dad, and his dad is like, "Oh, so I'm going to bow down to you as well. And he kind of puts him in his place a little bit. Joseph, at this point in time, from what we know about him, he's 17 years old. God is giving him these prophetic dreams, probably doesn't entirely know what to do with them. It's just communicating out to the rest of his family. But in doing so, he gets his brothers very, very upset. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So that's where we start off at. A place of immense familial tension, actual hate, dislike, favoritism. This is the setting. And this is why Joseph is an unlikely hero. Because he's not coming from some perfect family. He's coming from a setting that knew what it looked like to fight, to battle, and not just on a low scale, but in very ugly ways, which we will see rolls out here in just the next little bit. Now, I'm going to take you through a fairly quick, like I said, roller coaster, a pretty quick timeline of what happened in Joseph's life. And what I'm going to have you do is, I'm just going to have you use your thumbs up and your thumbs down. I'm going to tell you a couple of different bullet points that happened in his life. And when I do, then if you realize that that's a good thing and his life is on the up of the roller coaster, right? Then go ahead and just put your hand up. You don't have to keep it up, but just, give a little thumbs up. And then when I start talking about things that are headed downward, that are rough, then go ahead and just turn your hand down. I want you to actually feel a little bit of the momentum of this guy's life. Because he received a coat from his father Jacob, and it was a beautiful coat. It was like the hot rod, the car that would everybody come and look at and be like, wow, impressive. So what happened when he got his coat? How was Joseph feeling? Come on, you've got hands, right? Like, yeah, he was feeling up, right? Then he has two prophetic dreams. One about sheaves of grain, and then another one about the sun, moon, and stars. He wakes up in the morning, he's like, woo, how's he feeling? Up, right? Then a short time later, he has to go and meet with his brothers who are out having the flocks graze in different places. He's sent by his own father. He goes out to them, and when they see him coming, they say, oh, here comes the dreamer. And they have a vile plan. They're going to rip his coat. They're going to beat him. They're going to kill him. And then tell their dad that some ferocious animal ate him. That's how deep this hatred went. What do you think is happening there? Yeah, feel that, right? In fact, it's so low. Luckily, he has an older brother, Reuben, who says, let's not kill him. Let's just find a way to keep him in the game. Let's make some money off of it. Let's sell him to these Ishmaelites that are coming by who are headed to Egypt. And so that's what they do. They end up throwing him into a cistern. Think about your own brothers beating you up, tearing your coat, throwing you down into the bottom of a well, just because Father loved you more. So he's down now. He ends up getting sold to the Ishmaelites. I saw an artist's rendition of this at one point in time. I couldn't find a good picture of it, but there's this scene that's laid out in this painting of all the brothers standing around, and you see Joseph down on the ground, and he's a little bit beaten up, but more than that, he is slumped over. And there's just this sense of like rejection that you see in his character. Because I don't know about you, but there's nobody who could hurt me quite as badly as some of my family members. Like somebody out on the playground could have called me a name, and I've been like, oh yeah, right? I would have pushed back against it. But when my older brother called me something, or if one of my older sisters would say something to me, it cut me deep. And here he was, rejected by all the older siblings. Down, down, down. And so he's sold into slavery. The Ishmaelites take him over and sell him in Egypt to a man whose name is Potiphar. And while he is there as a slave within Potiphar's house, it says this in Genesis 39, verse 2, and then again in a little bit, another verse. So it says this, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, he put him over his entire household. How's that going now? Okay? He's still a slave, but he's not a slave living in the bunks. He is a slave within his master's house. It says that God was with him. Yahweh was with Joseph. And on top of that, he was being given more and more authority by Potiphar because Potiphar recognized this was something visible. If you were giving him the books, he was bringing them back to you with benefits. If you were putting him over a garden, he was bringing them back to you with greater produce. He had a golden touch. And that is because it says in this passage, and it says in other places as well in Joseph's story, that God, the Lord, was with him. So put that thumb up, right? It's going good. It's going well. And an important thing to point out in the midst of this is that God had not only jumped in when Joseph was with Potiphar, right? One of the things that we know is that God was present throughout the time with Joseph. We'll unpack a little bit more of what that means as we see him go on this roller coaster. But then something very tragic happens. And if you know the story, Potiphar has a wife who is taken with Joseph. It actually says within the text that Joseph was handsome and that he was fit. That's the kind of what we get out of the text, right? A buddy of mine sent me a picture one time of Joseph on the front of GQ magazine. Like ChatGPT could generate it, right? And he looked good, right? I was like, Joseph, okay, all right. But that was Joseph, right? Good looking, prosperous, making it happen, right? He was winning. And Potiphar's wife says to him, come to bed with me. Come on, come. My master is away. Come, spend time with me. And Joseph says, no, I can't do that. Potiphar's put me over his whole house. He has not put me over you. And so he makes a distinction. And Joseph actually at one point in time says very specifically, I cannot do this thing that you're asking me to, for it is a sin against my God. He's not just saying, no, it wouldn't be advantageous for me in terms of my relationship with my boss. He says, no, this would be a sin against my God. Think about that. Young man, 17 years old, sold into slavery, living hundreds of miles away from where anybody even knows who he was. And yet there he is in a spot of temptation. I don't know what you were like if you were a teenager or if you had hormones running through your body. But here you are being offered something. And in the face of that temptation, he remains faithful. It's a powerful, powerful story about what to do when temptation comes. He actually bolts. He says, I got to get out of here. He runs away. She grabs a hold of his cloak. He leaves it behind. Why is it that this guy struggles so much with his cloaks, right? You ever thought about that? He just can't catch a break. The first time he got a really nice coat, got him in a lot of trouble. The second time he can't keep it on, and it gets him in huge trouble. She holds onto his cloak, shows it to the master, and says, he came in to lay with me. And when he did, I screamed and he ran away, but I kept his cloak. And he gets in trouble. Ends up losing his job, losing his position. It says that Potiphar was very angry with him and he's thrown in prison. So he suffers unjustly. Even though he had his integrity, this is something to think about. His integrity is what ends up costing him his reputation, his position, and his status. A lot of times we like to think about the fact that, no, if you have integrity, it'll get you somewhere, right? Not always. And in the story of Joseph, his integrity, if he had not had integrity, maybe he could have kept it under the rug. His brothers didn't have integrity. Look where that got them versus where it got him. So this situation is now moving forward. Where's Joseph at now? Come on, you still got thumbs? He's down again. He's placed into a prison. He's there for a good period of time. Eventually, he meets two different officials who are part of the king's cabinet or the king's service. One is a cupbearer, one is the baker. They both have recently found that the Pharaoh does not like them, and so the Pharaoh sends them to prison. and they both have dreams. Interesting. How interesting that this young man at 17 years old had dreams, and now he finds himself with two people in jail who are talking to him and bring up the fact that they had dreams. And he says this to them, Genesis 40, verse 8. They say, "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." And then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Joseph had dreams. He does not yet know where his dreams are taking him. He's got no clue. At this point in time, he is 100% blind to the trajectory that God has him on. He has no hindsight at this point in time. He's had dreams that were really big. They just got him in trouble, right? They caused so much hurt and harm. And here he is years later, and he's sitting in prison, and he still has the confidence to say, God is the one who holds the interpretations to dreams. But he believes that God can actually use dreams to be able to move the future forward. And so he says, "Tell me your dreams." And they do. One of them tells them a story about a vine. One of them tells them a story about baskets of bread. It turns out that the cupbearer is going to be restored to his position. He has the opportunity to return to Pharaoh. The other is unfortunately going to be executed. And that is what ends up happening within 3 days' time. It's profound. Joseph interprets. So is that a thumbs up? It might have been, but here's the thing. Joseph tells the man, the cupbearer, "Hey, remember me when you return to Pharaoh." And immediately when he gets back and he's starting to do his cup again, he thinks back and says, "Wait, where did I leave my other cup?" He doesn't think about Joseph. He gets back to work. He does whatever he does. And Joseph is left to languish in prison for another 2 years. Only after 2 years, then, again, he's down, right? I hope you can feel that, right? It's a bummer for this guy. But after 2 years, Pharaoh has a dream that he cannot interpret. And he's questing around, asking everybody, who can interpret this dream? And eventually, the cupbearer comes to his senses and says, "Actually, the whole reason why I'm here is because somebody interpreted my dream, and that's how I was restored to you." And so Pharaoh sends for Joseph. It's a miracle that Joseph was not executed himself, but that Joseph was kind of just living in prison for a long period of time. Genesis 41, verse 15 to 16 says this, "Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'I had a dream. No one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it.' Joseph says, 'I cannot do it.' Joseph replied to Pharaoh, 'But God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires.'" Even now, 2 years later, he finally stands before the emperor of the entire known world, that whole region. He's right there in front of him. And what does Joseph say? He says something that you really should never say to a king. "I can't. No," right? He's like, "Well, what did we bring this guy up here? You know? Smells terrible," right? Like, why is he in my throne room? He says, "I can't." But he points to Yahweh. He points to his God and says, "But God can give Pharaoh what is needed, the answer he desires." This is profound. This is a person of unbelievable integrity. And what ends up happening, if you have the chance to go back and read the story, is that Pharaoh has a dream that basically shows that there are 7 really good years coming. And then after that, 7 really lean years of famine. And Joseph recommends, not only after interpreting the dream, but he recommends build barns, store up as much of the crop as you possibly can in the next 7 years. And then when the famine hits, have grain and sell and be able, hey, buy low, sell high, right? What a great principle. He knows what's up. And they do it. And Joseph is raised to the point where he is second in command over all of Egypt. It's a impressive move. Now, what I want you to understand is that even at this point in time, as Joseph is way, way up, right? That thumb goes way up. You have to understand that at this point in time, he still doesn't understand his own dreams. He still doesn't understand what has gone on. His life, step by step by step, has not been one of clarity. He's in the middle of a chapter. He's in a specific sentence, but he can't see the overall picture. He doesn't know what the author is up to, and yet he continues to trust the author. And I just look at all of us, and I know that for every single one of you here in the room, you've got things right now in your life that you don't understand. You've got positions or places that you're in, maybe of tension. Maybe it's actually a good thing, like you got a new job or you have a new relationship, but you don't know the future. You don't know what tomorrow holds. So we all have to agree kind of with Joseph about the fact that there's just so much that is up in the air about life. And when we find ourselves in these places where maybe we're looking at something really tragic, maybe it's a diagnosis, or maybe it's a loss of someone that we loved. Maybe it's a situation that we find ourselves in where, shoot, it just didn't work out like what we were hoping for. When we sit in those spots, we can look to the story of Joseph and not in a trite way just be able to say, oh, well, God's got this, right? We can sit in a spot and we can say, you know what? I think God understands this. God put this story in the Bible for a reason. He put this story in the Bible and gave us all 13 years of Joseph's ups and downs and disappointments and rejections and all of those different things because I think we need a story like this in our lives. There have been times where I really wish that God would have come through within my kind of timetable, and I found myself stretched months, years beyond what I thought that it would take. It's like the library book was due back, and here I am years later, and it's way overdue, right? Anybody have anything in your life that you're like, God, I just want you to say, I feel overdue when it comes to this? I had times in my life where I sat down with people I really trusted, people that I really respected, and I said, I don't know what to do about this situation that I find myself in. And one of them, a professor of mine that I really respected and who I really, really appreciated, he was listening to me as I was talking to him. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after college, and I just didn't have any options, not good ones at least. And I was like, what am I going to do about this? And I was talking to him about, well, if that doesn't work out, then how am I ever going to get to here? And if this doesn't, pan out and I don't have that kind of relationship or this kind of bank account, then how am I ever going to? And I was going, probably I'm probably forecasting out to like my 40s, which is where I am now, right? And he looked at me and he was like, okay, yeah. And he took a piece of paper and he just started to draw these little dots on it and just kept listening to me. And he was like, okay, yeah, thanks, Kyle, yeah, So compassionate, right? But then he said to me, he's like, hey, Kyle, I just want you to understand that, where you're starting at in this great big picture, God doesn't promise that he's going to give you the full outline of everything in this kind of connect the dots progression. In fact, really all that you're trying to do right now is just figure out how to go from here to here. And I'll be honest, when he told me that, I was not happy about that, okay? This is the kind of connect the dots that I wanted in my life, right? This is the kind that my kids do, right? Where I'm like, I know from the beginning it's a son, right? I know it's going to be a son. Let's do this adventure together. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. Look at that. It's even got a rhythm and a pattern, right? Oh, that's great. Like, isn't that nice? We know what it's going to be. We just get to see the final picture. This, though, is how I feel more often, is the way my life feels. I'm like, where do I even start? What kind of picture is God drawing? What's making out of my life here? I don't understand. If this is a constellation, I don't understand what's trying to be created here. This is how life is more often presented to us. And this is how Joseph finds, I think, himself multiple times. I don't know how often he wept. I don't know how often, or wept. I don't know how often he found himself just brokenhearted about the situation of his life. But what we read about again and again is that he, through various circumstances, what he can fall back on is character. he falls back on. He doesn't know the future, but he falls back on the fact that from here to here, he's just going to be faithful. He works in a way in each of the different settings that he's in. He works as a slave for Potiphar with great influence, with great excellence. And in the midst of that, God shows him favor. Then when he's put in prison, he does the same. Eventually, he is overseeing all of the prison. Then when he's put over Egypt, same thing. God shows him favor. And don't misread this story and be like, okay, if I do the faithful thing and if I got the character, I'm going to get rich, I'm going to get successful, I'm going to be on the front cover of GQ. That is not what this text is telling us. Because there are many, many faithful people throughout the Bible and many faithful people throughout history who are never vindicated in the way that Joseph is. Joseph eventually has his brothers, yes, the very same brothers who threw him into the well, come to Egypt looking for grain. They are sent by their father Jacob because there's a famine that is affecting them. And when Joseph sees them, and they actually come, and what do? They bow down to him. They do not recognize him. But then in Genesis 42, we read that they bowed down to him. And it was only in that moment. Now he's 30 years old. 13 years have transpired. Now he finds himself probably with this rush of sensation of like, this is what God was doing all along. And in that moment, when he sat upon a spot of authority, a spot of influence, it was in those moments that he could have had his vengeance. But instead, he knew that there was something that's better than vengeance. Forgiveness. And he chooses forgiveness. He chooses mercy. He kind of walks his brothers through this a little bit of a tricky path, and he works back and forth with them and eventually reveals to them that he is Joseph. And they're all terrified, but he tells them a powerful line, which is one of the most important verses in this story of Joseph. It's this, Genesis 50, verse 20. It says this, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people." And Joseph does. He saves thousands, maybe even millions of lives because of the grain that he had available, because of the position that he was put in. And he's able to save his own family in a way that he potentially would not have been. Now, it's important for us in the middle of reading a story like this to make sure that we don't get to a point where we're starting to say, oh, well, so what Potiphar's wife did, that ended up being good, so that was good, right? No. We have to call evil what it is. And Joseph does. He says, what you did, you intended it for harm. You intended it for evil. But what Joseph is acknowledging is the fact that he serves the God of the universe who has the ability to do something that no other God can do, which is to take even human evil and human sin, to not let it have the last word, but rather to take hold of it, to redeem it, and out of that evil to make good come about. It's because of this in the story of Joseph that so many people, when you read back the story of the Old Testament, you can sit back and say, oh, Joseph is foreshadowing the work of Jesus. We sang that song just a minute ago, Living Hope. Jesus was someone who was sent out by his Father to people who rejected him. He was accused unjustly. He was forced to suffer through situations that were not of his cause. And yet, because of his suffering, he positioned himself through the death on the cross to be able to preserve and actually bring about profound life to save people. The story of Joseph foreshadows and points to the story of Jesus Christ. For you and me today, we find ourselves where there's a lot that we can hold on to within this story. And that is that we can sit in a place where we can say, you know what? I'm in the middle of one of these right now. I'm on my way down. I'm feeling it, right? But I'm going to hold on to the truth that even though God might seem a little obscure at this point, even though I can't pinpoint what he's up to, I'm going to hold on to my character. I'm going to hold on to my integrity. I'm going to stay faithful. I'm going to figure out what it looks like to just move from dot 1 to dot 2 because I can't do dot 3, 4, 5, or 6 right now. I'm going to leave that in the hands of God. And I'm going to sit back and I'm going to say, all right, thank you for Joseph, who endured great suffering, and yet what we find is not that God's presence prevented hardship. Please don't think that that's the Christian life. God's going to be with me, and so it's smooth sailing. That is not what we see in this text. That's not what we see in the life of Jesus or in the life of the disciples. God's presence did not prevent hardship. It sustained Joseph through the hardship. And I'm sorry that I can't offer you something, different than that, but that's what our scriptures point us to. And here's the thing, we have that confidence that God is very, very good at even taking the evil. If you look around our world right now and you're like, man, there is evil that's happening. On the streets of our own cities, there's evil that's happening. In the different places where we live, work, and play, there's evil at times, hatred and malice and fighting and division. And we look at those things, and because of the story of Joseph, we don't sit back and say, that's it, that's the final word, it's over. We look at those things and we say, no, I serve a God who can interpret dreams. I serve a God who knows the whole story. I serve a God who has the ability, even if you are evil towards me, or even if I have failure within my own life, that I can call out and look to God and say, in my brokenness, in my distress, will you, God, bring about good? God can do that. How he will do that, when he will do that, man, we just sit in a place of humility, and yet we sit in a place of requesting and asking. And that's what I want to kind of point you to as we close out today. I'm going to invite the worship team to come up, but I want you to look at these questions here. Because one of the things that I've found in my life that has been so important when I'm trying to connect the dots and yet I can't, or when I'm sitting in a spot where I'm just on the downs, or even when I'm on the ups, right? Is I'm sitting in a spot where I need to ask some questions of God in prayer. And I love asking God open-ended questions. It's one of my favorite ways to pray because I get to say at the end of the prayer, hey, I'm leaving this one in your court, God. It's on your inbox. You keep thinking about it. I'm going to bed, right? It's a way for me sometimes to deal with my anxiety or deal with my stress around things. But I've prayed some of these prayers and let them sit with God for years. I was single all through my 20s. I had no idea, most people had no idea for me what I was ever going to do in terms of relationship. I had periods of time where I did not know what my next step was going to be in terms of a job. I have times with this church where the way that I'm leading it, where I'm like, what's next for us, Scott? And I find that I can return to these questions where God's presence doesn't necessarily remove all the hardship, but it does sustain me, and it does remind me that he's got the whole story in control, and I can trust him as the author. So God, what can I take from this? You might be in a situation where that's the question you got to ask. God, what can I take from this? Is there anything that I can take from this? Maybe God looks at it and it's all trash and just wants you to leave it be. God, where are you present? Where can I actually see evidence of your hand at work in the midst of the difficulty that I'm going through? God, open my eyes so I can see you in a place where I maybe haven't yet. God, what can I do in this situation? Where am I empowered? Where do I actually have strength or talent or ability or connection that I can move forward in? Because guess what? Joseph got busy in the meantime. And then, God, how do I live faithfully? And one of the things I want to be able to say that is good news for each and every one of us here is that when you feel unfaithful or you feel like you don't have the strength, that is a point in time where God wants to meet you and wants to be able to remind you that you might not win the game, but you can be faithful because he will support you through his Holy Spirit to be faithful, to be a representative of him, even in the midst of terrible situations that you never want to choose. And so we're going to sing a song to close out here in just a minute. But But I'm going to give you 1 minute before that song begins just to look at these questions. Which one of them lands the most for you? Regardless of if you're on an up or a down, which is a question that you need to pray and ask God, and then leave it with Him. But just for a minute, sit where you are, look at those questions, pray over them, maybe pray them for someone else too.